Hey everyone, welcome to GTM Secrets. Steve Lowisz here. Talk about everything go-to-market, sales, marketing, rev ops, marketing ops, you name it. Today I have JD Miller, who is an author, a CRO, a PE expert, you name it. JD, if you don't mind, give a little bit of better context on yourself.
Hey, Stephen, thanks for having me. So I've spent the last 25 years working in B2B tech sales. I began as an individual contributor, and through the career, I've moved my way up. I've been CMO and CRO a bunch of times, and 6 times it's been for PE-backed companies. And so right now I work for 5 Arrows Capital Partners. I'm their go-to-market advisor that works with the companies we own, talking about great things in sales and marketing. And I've just written it all into a book coming out on January 14th called The CRO's Guide to Winning in Private Equity.
So I'll plug you for you. Everybody go to jdmillerphd.com, go pre-order the book. First of all, did you come up from the sales side or the marketing side first?
I grew up in sales and then one day got offered a job at leading marketing. And so I had to learn very quickly early on. And really at the end of the day, I think both of them need to hold hands together. And so I talk a lot about the marketing organization is really where my heart is.
I haven't heard smarketing, but I love it. And I think every company should go the CRO route. Instead of having a VP of sales and marketing, you can have those in a big company, but at the end of the day, one person needs to lead both. I'm in full support of that model. So here's where I want to start. You and I were talking before, venture capital has a bad reputation. Now, I love mine, Startup Ignition, fantastic, love them, great guys. You go to firms like Sequoia and they hand you a check, F off, they don't want to talk to you again, right? Just give it a good return. Private equity has an even worse reputation often. So I'm really curious as to what is it actually like? So I'm going to ask, open-ended questions here. What is it actually like working in big PE firms or portfolio companies of theirs? And how does that affect your role as a CRO? You got to be as profitable and as skinny as possible typically, but you still need enough to show return. So to talk at a high level, what is it like?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, I've chosen to do it 6 times. So I've had great experiences with PE. But one of the things that I think is really consistent is that there's always a sense of urgency and there's always a sense of clarity on the result. And so in private equity, you'll hear us talk a lot about the rule of 40. And it says, a really well-run company, we're looking at 2 metrics. We're certainly looking at the profitability of the company, but we're also looking at growth. Yeah. And ideally, a strong company, if you add those 2 things together, it adds up to 40 or better. And so there are lots of ways you can get there. Certainly, early startups might be growing 80% a year over year, and losing money, negative 40%. But that's a rule of 40 company. That's great. The converse may also be true. You may have a highly profitable business, maybe it's 20% profit or 25% profit, and you're just trying to get the annual growth to be 15 or 20. And so I think the most important thing when you're working with your private equity owner is to understand what is the strategy? How are we going to collectively get to a rule of 40? And then the other thing that's exciting for me about private equity is there's a huge sense of urgency to get there. I kind of describe it like, house flipping. That used to be a big craze, where you're looking for companies that have good, solid bones. But if you put an investment into them to renovate the kitchen or renovate the sales and marketing team, they can be even better. And ultimately, the goal is to, hold it for a period of time and then let it go public or sell it to another owner. And so usually there's a time frame of maybe 4 to 5 years to get there. And so for me, private equity is about always knowing when that exit date is supposed to be, what are the metrics we're trying to get to, and then constant urgency iterating on all the projects.
I like the rule of 40. I've never heard that before, but makes perfect sense. How does it change? So I have a lot of experience working with CROs. I've been the head of sales and marketing. I get it. How does being in a private equity firm change the dynamic, for your responsibilities? How often are you communicating with them? I know being in the VC space, you better know your numbers, and I assume that PE is, damn well the same. But how does that actually change the CRO role in particular?
Yeah. So the CRO, the CFO, and the CEO, I think, are the 3 in the company who all have a high level of communication with the board, which is often the PE investor. For me, it starts at the beginning of the year with alignment on what our annual plan is. And so I've been in companies that say we have a very modest growth. It's going to be just about profit and we only want to grow 15%. I've been at other companies that say we want to grow 30 and 40%, and the profitability is less important. Whatever that metric is, or whatever that investment case is for us, we start the year with an annual plan that lays out month by month, team by team, how are we going to get to the result? So we're going to do some brand new business. We're going to go win new customers. We're going to sell some new things or new products to our existing customers. Hopefully we've got happy customers. We're going to renew them. They're going to take some price increases. We're going to minimize churn as much as we can. And so we start the year, working really closely with our board to say, in the year on all of those dimensions, here are the metrics we're trying to achieve. Here's the numbers at the end of the year. And here's what it should look like in January, February, March, April, May. And then I honestly like to have a cadence of weekly communication around that. And I've actually learned that it kind of gets people off my back as the CRO. If I can tell you, every Wednesday, there's going to be a flash report email that goes to me, my sales leaders, the executive team, and the board that just kind of reports the news of the day. Here's what our target was for the week or the month or the quarter. Here's where we got to at the end of this week. Here's why, and what are we going to do next? And then when you come together for a monthly board meeting or a big quarterly board review, there aren't as many surprises. And so the conversations get a lot easier, even if the news is bad, even if we're not making the number, having that kind of weekly cadence, people have seen it coming and we've started to have discussions about why and what can we do to change the outcome.
I think over communication helps no matter what, right? Even when I was in consulting, it always helps cover your butt, gets people off your back. VC, PE, I think people undervalue communication, over communication specifically. I kind of look at it, and again, I don't come from a PE background. I've worked with like one PE firm ever, but if you are getting asked questions, you probably didn't communicate enough in the first place. I want to beat you to the punch so you can rely on me.
Yeah.
Isn't it kind of the same?
I think that's fair. And I also think as a leader, communicating with my people the same information. Mm-hmm. And so, when I was an individual contributor, I had no idea where my quota came from. I thought it was high and I thought it kept getting higher every year and I didn't know why. So, as CRO, I really like to start the year communicating with every seller, kind of the big picture strategy. Here's what the company's goal is for the year. We're going to get there because we're launching a new product or we're going to break into a new geography or whatever it is. And then kind of breaking down by team and all the way to the individual, how do you support that goal? And then being able to report out to them, again, on that same weekly or monthly basis, how their contribution has made a difference. And so if you're someone in the help desk, it's easy to sit in the help desk and think, my manager just keeps telling me that I got to answer the call on the second ring. And that sounds really stupid. If I understand that the reason we're trying to answer the call on the second ring is because we're trying to improve our net promoter score of 3%, because that's going to add up to fewer churned customers. And that's going to add up to, bigger growth and profitability for the company. All of a sudden, it's a more inspiring place to be, and it all makes sense. So also says the guy with PhD in communication, corporate communication, up, down, sideways, is often the answer to kind of every problem that I see.
Yeah, sell everybody on the vision of what you're trying to do. Otherwise, you feel siloed. When I was an individual contributor, you do feel very siloed. There's a quota, nothing else matters. Getting a full picture certainly sells you on the role and gives you a little bit more sense of purpose. I don't know if that's the right word, but, makes you driven.
Yeah, and, you're talking about selling you on the role. I think it's actually communicating what the role is and letting you decide. I'm working with a company right now that had been founder-led. It was a very small startup for a long amount of time. And all of a sudden, they've gone through a couple mergers and acquisitions. They're 4 times bigger than they were a year and a half ago. And they have, a couple of sellers right now who are walking around saying, oh, this is not the place that it used to be. We used to all get together for lunch in the kitchen and the CEO was there. And I can't believe this new regime. You know what? I don't need to sell you to be in this environment. Let's just be clear about what the environment is. And yeah, we're way bigger now that we can't all fit in the same kitchen. And let's celebrate what that was and mourn it. And it's okay to feel bad about that. But let me be clear about what's exciting about the future and where we're going. And hopefully you like that. If you don't, that's okay too. It's okay to be someone who loved the little small kitchen environment. And let me go help you find another company that looks like that where you're going to thrive. So it's fair to understand you're in a different age and stage and self-select out of it too.
So I fully agree with that. Get on board. And if you want to self-opt out, then more power to you. Here's where I want to go next, though. So I imagine that one of the big things that you have to report on, and tell me if I'm wrong, is CAC, right? Customer acquisition cost.
Yep.
And I think one of the reasons that I like the CRO model as opposed to just two separate functions is the fact that marketing brings in MQLs. Sales says these leads suck. And then you have this giant debacle, right?
Never have I heard that problem before.
Right. So when you're a CRO, you're really focused on CAC. Are we driving the right leads, the most profitable leads, et cetera? Leads aren't created equal. Some are worth more than others. It's just, the fact of nature right now. So let's start at the top of the funnel. What are some of the more cost-effective demand gen strategies that you found be effective, specifically in B2B tech, B2B SaaS? I know that your last company, Cantata, was a PSA, professional services software. What have you found to be a cost-effective demand gen channel when ads are going up, SEO is changing because of AI and so forth? Like, it's just getting more difficult. How do you think about that?
Yeah. So to take a step back from tactics, and we can talk about tactics too, because I think there's a lot going on with AI and all kinds of tools that can tell you exactly who's on your website right now and send you a text and give you all kinds of fun things to say. But take a step back and say, first begins with really alignment on what the story is today. Fortunately, the last data that I saw says it takes about 18 touches to turn cold prospects into someone who's going to take a sales call with you. And that number goes up all the time. And so, when I think about what are the 18 touches that generate a lead for me, it's no one tool. It's a whole bunch of different things. There's emails, there's outbound phone calls, there's marketing retargeting ads, there's SEO, there's web chat, there's all of that stuff going on. And so the first thing is to, kind of map out what are all the touch points in our customer life cycle, how many is it taking today, and what's most effective. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to get really strong alignment between sales and marketing on who's the ideal customer profile and who are the ideal personas in there, so that we can start to get kind of a heat map of here are all of the companies we're trying to meet, here are the people within the companies we're trying to meet. And now let's start pointing that engine of our 17, 18, 20 touches at you and see what happens. Now, when we look at that over time, good data will show you can do A/B testing on messaging or tools and start to figure out, okay, this kind of work stream works really well for us. This one is less. And so I might go from 20 touches to 18 or 16 touches, or maybe I'll get one on 9. But I think the first piece is getting alignment on where are we headed, what are we doing today, and just how are we measuring that. Then when you talk about efficiency, I always really like to look at a metric of sales velocity. And so, you opened this question by saying sales and marketing are pointing fingers at each other. Marketing is not giving me enough leads, and those salespeople aren't doing a good enough job with the great ones I'm serving up.
Yep.
So for me, sales velocity is, the number of opportunities you're putting into a funnel times the size of the opportunity times your win rate and dividing it by the days in your sales cycle. And it gives you sort of a metric of, how many dollars are we selling by day or by week, sort of your velocity metric. And I really like to sit and look at our leads and kind of calculate the velocity of different teams or sometimes different markets or segments. Because in the companies that I've worked for, customers tend to fall into 3 big buckets. Your big giant enterprise buckets, where all of those inputs to sales velocity are huge. They're giant deal sizes. It's a very small number of leads, but they're very long sales cycles. And, you get a nice win rate there. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got a really small SMB team that, they're tiny deals, but often it's self-serve and marketing can do it with, videos on the web. You don't ever talk to a person and then the deal closes in a day. And then the bulk of it is sort of sitting in the middle, kind of the mid-market teams that, is sort of the Goldilocks of all of that. So I often orient my teams around an enterprise sales team, a mid-market sales team, and a self-serve SMB motion. But then we're looking at that kind of sales velocity metric to figure out what's the right number of leads, what's the right conversion rate, and what exists today. And when you actually get into the detail, it really resolves this kind of conversation that we had with sales and marketing. I began a role at a company not long ago that they recruited me in as the CRO and said, we think we have a sales problem. We think the skill of the sellers is bad. And we know this because marketing is creating tons of MQLs. So, okay, great.
I see where it's going.
Well, it doesn't actually end where you think it's going, because when I got in, I looked and marketing was creating a ton of MQLs and they were converting at a really high rate. So marketing conversion was awesome. But the sales close rate was also really awesome. They were winning 32% of their deals. And so we kind of pulled back and we looked at, what's the velocity? And what was happening is their deal sizes were getting much, much smaller than they'd ever been before. So the company was seeing declining revenue, and the only metric they heard was MQL, and they assumed it must be sales win rate. When we actually looked at sales win rate, sellers were great. Marketing was great too, but the size of the opportunities had fallen off. It was because we were selling into a set of industries that were going through a little bit of recession. And so the size of the deals, the number of employees they were buying the product for, was smaller than it had been before. And the install base of customers weren't calling up as frequently to say, I just hired 3 more employees this week, give me more.
Yeah.
But it was this sort of subtle shift that until you looked at all of the inputs, you didn't know. And so our solution was, let's move our ICP up market. We used to think these big giant players, were out of our league. And actually, because of this, weird recession going on, that's actually a target that we can match today. And when we fixed that, MQLs, same number of MQLs, deal size went up, win rate was the same, but the company's fortunes were buoyed.
Makes perfect sense. What do you call the metric where you take your win rate, multiply it by the number of opportunities, the opportunity value, and divide it by day? What do you call
I call that sales velocity.
Sales velocity. Got it. So essentially, as you mentioned, revenue per day.
Yeah, it comes out to revenue per day. And, if you've got teams of size, it's helpful to kind of calculate that velocity metric by team, because revenue per day of your enterprise team is going to be different than revenue per day of your self-serve on the web team. But the customer acquisition cost that you talked about earlier is also going to be very different. So I like to get into cadence on a monthly basis. And, I've been fortunate to have a nice big RevOps team. But on a monthly basis, we calculate that for each of our teams, and then we look at trends. Is it improving? Is it declining? And one data point does not make a trend, but once you get 3 in a row, something is happening that we really need to start opening the dialogue again between the whole marketing organization and product and everyone else. Here's what the data is showing, what's causing that, and how are we going to course correct? And again, I've never run a perfect organization. There is always something broken. And even in that company, I ran marketing and I ran sales. And so if it was an MQL problem or a sales skill problem, it belongs to me.
Yep.
We might align on one or more of those. And we might have to say, you know what, this is a year where we're rebuilding the sales team. And the skill is going to be really low because it's all brand new sellers who don't know what they're talking about. And so marketing is going to have to lean in a bit harder this year, unnaturally. Or maybe we're going to turn to the sellers and say, you know what, this is a really tough year for marketing. They've spent all of their budget or whatever the story is. And you're going to have to overperform, against what you have in the past. If we all understand it and all communicated about it, people are willing to give one another some grace. But it's really, having those clear, transparent conversations as frequently as you can. We all understand the water we're swimming in.
So in large part, alignment is subjective. How do you actually ensure alignment between sales and marketing? Because yes, everybody I think would agree that they should be on the same page, but tactically, how do you do that?
Yeah. So I like to publish, I call it the win creation waterfall. And there's a template for this in the book you can download, out of the chapter. But it starts with, if I'm a seller who's got $1 million quota, what are all the precursors that set up to me selling $1 million? So for easy math, I make my quota when I sell 10 $100,000 deals. And then what's my win rate on my deals? I win 1 out of every 4. So I've got to have 40 opportunities. And then all the way down the waterfall to, so how did I, what does it take to create an opportunity? How many MQLs did marketing send? How many did I have to self-source? How many cold calls was an SDR doing? And all the way down the path. And the first thing I want to do is just publish that waterfall of what is actual today. And we do that team by team by team. So the seller, the SDR, if they have one, the marketer who covers that territory, me and the manager look on a monthly basis at, what does the data say it takes to win? And then we can start to have a conversation on where's their inefficiencies. You know what? The benchmark for a great sales organization is winning 35% of the time. So if you got a 25% win rate, I am going to challenge you that, you've got to improve that. Now, it doesn't mean that for the next month, marketing isn't still going to have to lean in with, more MQLs. But can we agree we're also going to try and fix that one, right? And same thing all the way down the path. And so that's the one piece of like really looking at every input, measuring what today looks like, agreeing on the goal of what the future should be, and then we can constantly take incremental steps to get better.
Now, let me ask you this. Closing rates for almost every company have taken a nosedive in the last couple of years, right? A lot of companies have the benchmark at 15 to 20%. So let's call that 17.5, which I think is abysmal. I'm a sales guy. I better be above 50%, me personally, not my team.
Sure.
How do you get, though, to 35 as the ideal benchmark? What led you to that? Because it is essentially double what companies are willing to accept these days, which, by the way, I think is a very wrong standard. I think 80% of my time knowing it's a waste is just abysmal. So I agree with you. But how do you come up with that number?
So I get that through experience. Now, again, I've operated in a very specific context of B2B tech that are 50 million to maybe 300 million in ARR. So maybe unique in the environments we operate in. I care less about the 30% or is it 17%? I care a lot more about, do we understand what it is today and where we want it to go? But I do think that close rates are going down. It's been curious for the last year to watch the financial news because some news reports will say, look at the stock market is hitting all these highs you've never seen before. And then consumer sentiment is, this is the worst economy. We're in such a recession.
Inflation's up, but the stock market's up.
So I don't know, are we in a good economy or bad? What I know as a seller is it's really driven much more discussion about ROI. And so from my marketing experiences, I've sold and marketed many different kinds of products, but I always think it comes down to three kinds of messages. I'm either selling you a product that's going to make you more money, that's going to cut your costs, or help you comply with the law and keep you out of jail. I think the easiest products to sell are the ones that have some kind of legal compliance. You must buy this product because someone's going to come arrest you if you're not doing these things. But after that, I think people are much more likely, they're very risk averse. And so they're much more likely to buy products that are going to save them money than invest in something that's going to grow the business. So the more we can, and especially when the economy message is like, are we in a recession? And I'm getting very nervous. Then people become even more risk averse. And it's really all about how can I cut costs? And so I think part of what we see with declining win rates is what's the message? What is the light we're casting on our product? And I think all products can both generate more revenue for you and cut costs for you. But depending on the economy and the sentiment of your buyer, it may be leaning much more closer to that kind of risk management side than, let's opportunistically try and grow your business because of all the great benefits of my product. And I think the worst ones, sorry, I'm sort of just going on this one. I think the worst ones are sales teams and marketers that are just showing up with features and saying, look at this really cool report I've got. Isn't that neat? Those win rates are going to plummet really badly unless I can really connect, the detail of what you can do with my website to the business benefit I'm going to get at the end.
I'm tracking with you. I was interviewing somebody the other day for a CTO role for Identity Matrix. And, I conveyed how fast we move because we are such a small startup. And he's like, well, I was going to ask you what are the expectations in the first 6 months, but I think it should be the first 6 days and 6 weeks. Being in a larger company, I think you said 50 to 300 million, in ARR, somewhere in that mid-market, let's call it. You obviously have a longer process of iterating, or at least I would assume, of iterating, measuring, optimizing, planning, et cetera. Whereas for me, it's like, well, met with my advisors today. We decided we're going to do this. So by tomorrow, I'm going to have V1 cranked out, right?
Yep.
What is your process for iterating? Let's talk specifically about marketing campaigns. What's your process for planning and iterating? Because you also have PE that's going to come down and say, well, this obviously didn't work after 3 months. What are you doing? Or is that 2 months? Or is it 18 months? What does that iteration cycle look like?
Yeah. So, we started by talking about, I believe the PE context gives us a sense of urgency, but it also, being in the larger type company, we also have a lot of resources at our command. We've got a lot of tools, we've got a lot of people, we've got a lot of data, so we can see things pretty quickly and make decisions fast. I think about maybe your CTO coming on board. And yes, the kinds of companies I've worked for have really sophisticated product development processes that, think really carefully about the market, test features, and so on. But I also think that it's, again, comes back to this communication and alignment that, whether it's a marketing campaign or a product launch or whatever, the most important thing is that we can all agree on who are we building it for? What's the value that they're getting out of it? And what does that mean the product needs to do? And then how do I communicate to that market, the benefit that they're going to get as a result? And I think you can get an analysis paralysis, take a long time on that. But if you're really clear on answering those questions, it can be really fast. So here's an example. In 2019, 2020, I was working at a company called Modus. And Modus is an acquisition. Some of the roots of that company have gone back 85 years. But today they sell a piece of technology that's all about the price of gas. And they sell it to companies that have people who drive for work. And so if you've ever gotten, 55 cents a mile or 60 cents a mile for driving your car for work, Modus sets that rate with the IRS, and they have all these other products that do that too. Well, early in 2020, I'm running this, big sales team that's selling the price of gas to mobile workers, and COVID shut down the environment, and suddenly no one was driving for work. So who cares about what the price of gas is and what I should reimburse people on? But I was really proud of what we did there, because in 3 weeks, we pivoted and said, product said, the same technology we use to collect the price of gas everywhere across the country, we can use that same technology to collect what's the price of electricity, what's the price of cell phones, what's the price of, taxes in home offices. And within 3 weeks, launched this home office reimbursement stipend program that we were able to go to market with everyone and say, hey, guess what? Your employees are all working at home, and they're suddenly going to have all of these questions that have legal implications in states like California and all this stuff about how much you're supposed to reimburse them for using their personal home, the same way we used to talk about reimbursing for your car. We were able to spin up the product, get the marketing message out, and get our first sales done in about 3 weeks. And it's actually how I made my Q2 number in 2022, with sale of that product. So yes, I had the luxury of a big organization, and I had probably 175 people in sales and marketing. And I wouldn't say that every product launch should be that way, but I think we were successful because we got really clear really quickly on what's the pain we're solving for, who has that pain, how does the product solve it, and then how do we get that message in front of those folks?
It's interesting. That's fast.
It was super fast.
And I imagine the infrastructure for something like that, it's not small.
Yeah. And I think, that is the other thing about, the bigger sort of, we're not just 3 people in a startup. So, certainly all the marketing engines and the tools and everything was sitting there, and, all the good supportive product stuff was there too. But it still is a message that I was talking about, clarity of who are you selling to and what's the value you're giving them is going to be consistent.
Got it. So here's my last question for you. You've been a go-to-market leader for a while. You have some reps under your belt, to say the least, which is awesome. But you've also worked in what I have to assume are very high-pressure environments. Again, I'm in a startup, so I can appreciate the heck out of that.
Sure.
How do you keep your team motivated or driven and on task in a high-pressure environment, which I realize is a little vague? Burnout's a real thing. Personal work balance is a real thing, right? How do you get your team running like an engine in such a high-pressure environment?
Yeah. So we could spend an hour talking about these things, but I think a couple of themes. On my personal website, you see me talk. I describe my leadership as sort of integrating business, technology, and humanity. And that humanity is really talking about, I have a PhD in organizational communication. As a leader, we need to remember that our teams are people first, and they all have individual motivations. When we're setting goals, we need to set goals that humans can achieve. Yes, we've got a lot of urgency to get somewhere, but what we also always have to ground that in, realistic goals, knowing that people are going to turn over, you're going to have empty territories, someone's going to get married and have a baby. We have to support all of that kind of stuff first. The second is, how do we get really clear about what the business goal is, and how do we set up plans with realistic expectations? So it's exactly where I started from is, I'm setting out a $20 million revenue goal this year. Let's not just say, hey, everybody, scramble really hard and try and sell $20 million. We've got to take the extra step and understand, how much do we think is going to be new logo sales? And what are all the lead gen and all those other things going to lead up to that? How much of that is going to be sale of a new product to a new customer? And, what's the health of our existing customers and how many are likely to take it and all of that? So that it's not just, putting a whole team of people through this, slog to the top of a mountain that they have no idea where it's going, but it's actually showing them the path that says, we have a plan of how we're going to get that number. Now we're going to miss the plan and, the mountain is going to have, turns and all of that sort of stuff. But let's at least lay out the roadmap of what we think it is. So that every week we're talking about how you personally moved closer to the goal or where you're hitting that roadblock. What can we all do to course correct when kind of reality meets our best laid plans?
Makes sense. I like it. JD, I think you've made this tactical, which I like. A lot of times when people are talking about communication or strategy or collaboration and alignment, it gets to be really high level and there's no practicality behind it. I think you're exceptional at making it more practical, so I appreciate it. I assume you're going to say LinkedIn, but where's the best place for people to connect with you?
Yeah, LinkedIn is great. My personal website is great too. It's jdmillerphd.com. And then that connects me to all the socials, LinkedIn, Facebook, and, all the rest of them are all, kind of launching off that JD Miller PhD.
And I do encourage everybody to go buy the CRO's Guide to Winning in Private Equity. I'm not in PE, but I am very curious, so I'm going to go check it out. It's January, 9th?
January 14th, but it's already available for pre-sale today on Amazon and everywhere great books are sold.
Well, I may have to get it on, the 15th. I think I have jury duty that day. Anyways, I digress. JD, really appreciate you coming on, man. Thanks so much.
It's great to meet you.